Hi, everyone. Tonight I have a book review for you, a really, really interesting book that I really enjoyed reading about a very narrow time in American history and about a pretty narrow subject, but I enjoyed it so much that I definitely wanted to share it with you. It's called Manhood at Harvard, William James and Others by Kim Townsend. Don't let the manhood at Harvard either the manhood or the Harvard part throw you off or put you off. And of course, the William James in the subtitle refers to the American philosopher. This is a really beautiful sort of extended essay on a variety of interdisciplinary themes, from sociology to culture to philosophy to college life at Harvard, around the last third of the 19th century. Kim Townsend, who is the author, has as on the Amherst site. He doesn't work there anymore. He's now emeritus, but it's still up. And one of his academic interests listed on the site is American literature and culture from 1865 to 1925. And while this book doesn't go quite up to 1925, it does start right at the end of the Civil War, the American Civil War. And he really sort of lets his interest in, especially culture, not so much literature here, shine. Townsend himself earned his PhD at Harvard, and it's obvious that the culture both grew on him and really continues to fascinate him. As the title divulges, this is a book largely concerned very much with what we would call the cult of manhood at Harvard between around 1865, as I said, and around 1905, focusing heavily on the colleagues and the students of American philosopher and pragmatist William James. Because of the time period covered, Townsend's interest is almost exactly coeval with the leadership of Charles William Eliot, who was Harvard's longest-serving president and who served from 1869 to 1909, exactly 40 years. James, Eliot, and the man who followed Eliot, whose name was Lowell, all believed that Harvard was a kind of intellectual fraternity. This language, both inside and outside institutions of higher education, sounds really old-fashioned, and I kind of guess it is, right? We never hear people speak like this anymore. But depending on who was speaking, there were various amounts of misogyny, imperialism, and racism behind these declarations, with William James perhaps being one of the more liberal and humanistic, and the big, bold blustering of Teddy Roosevelt, class of 1880, holding up the other side of the spectrum. However, the narrow topic of manliness isn't sustained for the entire book, and that's sort of why I said don't let the word manliness for a almost 300-page book put you off. Townsend is just as interested in James's early life, especially the time he spent in his late 20s suffering from what was then identified as neurasthenia, what we might today call bipolar disorder, or maybe even depression. There are really judicious, wonderful interludes describing James's pragmatism, if you're not familiar with his thought, which I've always found sort of a peculiar flurry of Emersonianism and Greek Stoicism. James's writing has always struck me as having so much that's American in it. Its ability to temporize, its relentless sympathy with religiosity, its ability to create itself anew. These were always attractive qualities to me when I read James in college. However, I was always put off by his particular explicit disinterest in metaphysics or ethics, sort of these more traditional topics that philosophy was supposed to take up. But I always sort of wanted him to take them up, even though I might invariably disagree with his conclusions. But whatever my personal opinion of James's thought, this book really gives you... Townsend has a really infectious passion for James the man and James the teacher. You learn a lot about him as a teacher, as well as Alice James being his sister, and Henry James Sr., who was an important thinker in his own right. Henry James Sr. was his father. Of course, Henry James, the more famous Henry James, was his brother, the novelist. Came from a pretty illustrious family. Townsend also covers several elements of just ordinary college life, especially the sea change in opinion that was occurring in sports. Before around the 1860s, sports were an afterthought at Harvard and most other American institutions of higher learning, considered mostly a distraction from the scholarly pursuits of Latin, Greek, and Dante. But after the Civil War, there arose a decidedly pro-sports faction within universities. Some were moderate in their advocacy of sports, thinking that a healthy mind was just as important as a healthy body, while others, especially Teddy Roosevelt, couldn't possibly conceive of how someone could become a man without rowing crew or being on a football team. President Eliot mostly bemoaned the rise of sports, seeing it as an unnecessary incursion into collegiate culture, but he suffered in silence for the most part. Townsend also talks about how Eliot, who really plays a large part in this book, and talks about how he was a great educational reformer. Eliot is the person who made Harvard most of what we recognize it as today, which is arguably the greatest educational institution in the country. He details how Eliot regretted the rise of specialization and professionalism associated with college education, and that Eliot held the older, humanistic, probably more pre-Civil War position that it was the duty of every person, and that was for a long time every man, let's be clear, to better himself through the pursuit of learning, not just of those people who crudely want to capitalize and utilize their education for strictly monetary gain. While the central figures are undeniably, like I said, Eliot and William James, the peripheral ones abound too. There's the Catholic philosopher George Santayana, there's Henry James, Nathan Schaller, Gertrude Stein, whose passion and interest in James was really undying. She admired him to no end. And of course, she went on to have a famous relationship with Alice B. Toklas. Teddy Roosevelt, of course, class of 1880, as I said, and even W.E.B. Du Bois. Even though these people were all at an elite educational institution, and of course you expect to find really, really smart people at institutions like Harvard, during the last third of the 19th century, it's still wonderful to think that so many great minds mixed there not so long ago. Certainly out of living memory, but 120 years ago. It's not that long. And this book provides really generous excerpts from their letters that talk about ideas and personalities. And it's just wonderful to read them. Above all, Townsend provides a portrait of a specific time and culture in American history that truly is past. And so much of it strikes us American modern readers as crude and maybe full of machismo and sexism. And I think we have to sort of be careful about not making the crucial mistake of being too quick to pass judgment about people who've had radically different assumptions from our own. Even if we do think we're right, we sort of have to look at them and deal with them on their own terms. There is a lot that inspires and emboldens the imagination here. It would be easy to idealize and romanticize the time and place, even for its many obvious flaws, which I've talked about. But this is really a careful balance of biographical information, of intellectual history, and of college life, which really deserves to be taken seriously by anyone who is compelled by these subjects. And just as an end note, I would like to especially thank Lauren, my friend on Goodreads, who was so kind as to send me this book, as she has sent me so many others, probably a couple of dozen, at absolutely no charge, just because she wanted to get rid of hard copies of books and get them in e-versions. So this was one of my acquisitions via Lauren. So Lauren, if you're watching, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and I enjoyed the book. Manhood at Harvard, William James and Others, by Kim Townsend.